Welcome to the AVForums podcast, presented by Jason Bradbury.
Welcome to the first AVForums podcast with me, Jason Bradbury.
Thank you, Jason, but I think I can take it from here. Yes, that's how we first started the podcast, all the way back in March 2006. Hello and welcome to the 768th podcast from AVForums, a hardware podcast anyway. It's developed over the years, but this is published on Monday, the 12th of May, 2025. It's our final podcast for a while, actually. We're going to take a break, so we're not killing the podcast off. We're not cancelling it in this cancellation culture that we have on at the minute. No, none of that. It's just we've got other things that we really need to be concentrating on. So we're going to take a little bit of a break on the podcasts, and we're going to bring you more video reviews. We're going to bring you more videos, more articles on the website and on our YouTube channel. So to do all of that, the podcast is going to take a little bit of a break. But joining me on this final edition for a little while anyway is our hi-fi editor, Ed Selley. Hi, Ed.
Hello, sir.
From Surround Group, we got Neil Davidson. Hi, Neil.
Hi, Phil.
We've also got our reviewer, Martin Dew. Hello, Martin.
Hello.
And news editor, Ian Collen is joining us. Hi, Ian.
Hello.
Right, so in this episode, what are we doing? Well, we're going to look back at the last 20 years. That's right, we've been around for 20 years. And even after 20 years, we've got lots to talk about. I mean, loads to talk about, but we're going to try and keep it within the hour. Fingers crossed. Yeah, we're going to share with you our memories, our highlights, some of the things that have been and gone in the time that the AVForums podcast has been around in the world of AV. So if you're watching or you're listening to this, then why not head down to the comments section, wherever you are watching it or listening to it, and give us, your memories, your time in this hobby of AV, what was around when you first got into it? Where are you now in terms of kit and all the rest of it? It'll be really interesting to hear your point of view, because that's what you're going to hear from us in this episode. So where did it all start? Where did it all go wrong? 2nd of March 2006, you heard Jason Bradbury right at the start of this podcast. Jason was the presenter from podcast number 1 to podcast number 73. And right the way back in that first episode, we had a feature from John Archer. John's still writing reviews for us now. Very well-known AV journalist. John's been around a long, long time. So he did a feature on Sony TV trip to Tokyo. These things still happen. Nothing's changed in 20 years. So John did that feature. We also had disc reviews from somebody called Phil Hinton. Don't know whatever happened to that guy. There was gaming updates from actually one of my mates, Neil Gardhouse, did a few episodes for us. And Sean Marin did a Bristol show report back from 2006. So that was podcast number 1. That was quite some time ago. So it started out as audio only. It was fortnightly. We had podcast extras. And I'm going to come to Ed and Neil, because Ed and Neil were around in the days where we did audio. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about your memories of the audio only, because I think we had a lot of fun doing those, because it was just a case of switch and record, and I had an envious task of then editing it all. But what's your memories, Ed?
Obviously, the audio-only ones, because I didn't have to edit them, were tremendously enjoyable, because, broadly speaking, if we made a complete horlicks of something or ended up saying something that was appallingly litigious, it didn't necessarily matter, because it could all be magicked away later on. So the thing is, they have a flow when you listen back to them that is there because, broadly speaking, a lot of guff was edited out of them. And broadly speaking, because they, if you needed a run up to get something actually said and done properly, it just was done. And for the most part, they were also recorded significantly late. Well, all the ones I did were generally recorded significantly later in the day, which meant that for the most part, I was significantly less sober than I am now, which I also feel probably at least shaped my output in some way, shape or form. I think the thing is, when you look back on any of these things, you are inclined to remember about 6 or 7 podcasts. And you sort of, you then realize you did dozens and dozens of them. And often they're good to listen back to, but they don't necessarily, especially if they were topical, They don't necessarily stick in the mind. I mean, I don't know about you. If we're going early highlights, my single favorite recording experience is when we decided to discuss the cinematic masterpiece that is Theodore Rex.
Yep.
There's just nothing, just in terms of the sheer, it just degenerated
Yeah.
from barely coherent to completely and utterly incoherent in the space of about 15 minutes. And it was yeah, it was just joyous. I mean, you can't really say much more than that. And I don't think we necessarily covered anything of any real note other
Yeah.
than Whoopi Goldberg.
I'd forgotten all about that, and I've now got PTSD.
So things like that were tremendous fun. And essentially, it was it's a different way of doing things. I suppose in this way, shape, or form, it feels tremendously old fashioned now. But I think you see enough comments from people going, well, I actually still consume the podcast in that way. I just listen to four idiots intoning on various things for a varying length of time. And sometimes we very, very rarely got anything covered in the manner that we intended to, or in the duration we intended to. But the end result was usually semi-listenable. So, what more can you ask for?
Well, the thing was, we ended up going down some rabbit holes and some having some, like you say, some real laughs and so on, because we weren't live, we weren't doing it on video and so on, and it was a bit more laid back. The reason why I came to you first, Ed, is because I want to go back to Neil, because we did an interview in December 2007, Neil and myself, and we were very fortunate to interview Tomlinson Holman. If you don't know who Tomlinson Holman is, should you be in the AV hobby? Or so for those that don't know, Tomlinson Holman, Tom Holman, he started a long time ago as an audio engineer. He was brought on board by George Lucas at the time of Return of the Jedi. George Lucas was not happy about how the films were being shown in cinemas, and he wanted to come up with a framework that he could go to all these cinema chains and say, this is how it should be shown and so on. And it became Tomlinson Holman's experiment, THX, which also harked back to one of George Lucas's student films and then feature film THX 1138. So there was a bit of a crossover there, bit of an X added onto it. And that's where that started. So I don't know if you remember the interview, Neil. It's been a long time ago now, but it was just... And this is the beauty of the podcast now and again, is you get to speak to sometimes some people that are heroes of yours, and some people who they're just so clever. What they've come up with in their careers and so on. And he's one person, because he did THX and then he really got into room acoustics and that kind of thing. And he was behind Odyssey, which was started out as a university project, Odyssey, and then became a commercial venture. So fascinating bloke, and that's one of the beauties of the podcast. He can speak to people like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's actually interesting, this process, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I don't feel much different. And then you hear back in 2007, when we did this interview, I'm like, wow, I have really forgotten a lot of stuff over the years, it seems. It won't be the first time I've actually gone back and listened to myself and thought, that guy knows a lot of stuff. You should listen to him. So that's always been something that I've enjoyed about that. It's been lucky, actually, to be part of something like this for such a long period of time. I don't think many people would have a little, a record, a snapshot of time of what they've been interested in and what's been going on in the way that the podcasts have. And I guess I forget myself how much these things hang around. We speak about YouTube videos and all that type of stuff, but the podcasts have always been very popular as well, haven't they?
Yeah. Well, I mean, 2006, 2007, YouTube was just getting started. That's, again, that's what you got to remember, what the landscape was like back then when we were doing the original podcast.
But to cut through the dinosaurs and the mammoths and stuff like that to get into work in the morning.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right, Neil, and that's one of the things. I mean, I haven't spent too much time recently going back over older podcasts, but kudos to Andy, who works, tirelessly behind the scenes here, putting things together, and he does a lot of my admin for me, so I can do the reviews and everything else that I do. He's put together a cracking document that we've decided we're going to publish it as an article to go on top of the podcast forum. But he went through a lot of the the podcast. He actually used AI, which I think's a brilliant idea, to try and collate a lot of this stuff. And he's put together a fascinating document. So we're going to publish that. We're going to put that at the top of the podcast forum, because it's got links back to some really interesting things that have happened over the time of the podcast, and some episodes that really stand out over others. So we're talking about interviews. I've done 2 interviews with Danny Dyer. Yes, the Danny Dyer. That was back in the days of the bleep machine. So that was used quite a bit in those 2 interviews. So that was December 2006 and February 2007. He was talking about Severance and Straightheads, the films that he was in at the time. So I got the opportunity to do that. I've interviewed quite a few people. We did an F1 thing with LG a long time ago, and I managed to speak to one of my heroes because he was brought up not too far away from me in Scotland. So David Coulthard, I managed to spend time talking to him and some of the F1 drivers and that kind of thing. And doing things like this, really interesting. You get to speak to some really interesting people. So, yeah, there's loads of appearances of reps from manufacturers, technical experts like Thomas and Holman. We've spoken to the likes of Dirac and Denon, and name them. We've interviewed them on the podcast, and we've talked to them in quite some detail. Some of them a number of occasions. So, like I say, Andy's put together a fantastic document. We're going to publish that. So, if you're interested, you can time travel and go back and listen to myself and Neil on that interview back in 2007. Listen to Ed's first hi-fi podcast introduction. And also in 2011, we discussed The Lover's Guide in 3D. It came to Blu-ray at the time. Simon Crust's review. He actually used a string of poorly chosen phrases such as opening the floodgates and planting the seed and all that kind of thing. And yes, it was as bad as you imagine it to be in terms of puns and just going down a rabbit hole, basically. Very funny, very childish. But like Theodore Rex, a bit of a podcast legend that you can go back and listen to. And like I say, Andy's put together a fantastic document for you to do that. So yeah, we started audio only. It was fortnightly. We split them off into hardware and movies. We also then further split it into TV displays, calibration, hi-fi, home AV, movies, 4K discs. There's been some gaming podcasts. So I'm going to come to Ian next because Ian did a very funny thing a number of years ago. Yeah, it was probably the only funny thing I think you've done, Ian, is it? Or, Bullseye.
It's a very short list.
Do you know what I'm talking about when I say Bullseye? The countdown.
The top 10.
The top 10.
We did it when we used to do the top 10 gaming list.
Yeah. Do you want
just to mix it up, we did I kind of spent some time putting the top 10 to the theme of Bullseye in the way that they used to announce the prizes, the whole in one. And then they'd do a funny little rhyme and it would be, this is what the prize equates to. So I did that for the top 10. I think a lot of it might be there might have been a bit of swearing in there. So I'm not sure if I can repeat all of it. I think I referred to, I can't remember, I think it was Sonic or FIFA. It's like the last one was shite, but this one was all right, I think. Was the kind of, that was as much as I could come up with to rhyme for it. So yeah, it was fun putting it together and quite fun to do.
Yeah.
But as the gaming podcast, and I assume all the rest of the podcasts were, they're always the kind of things that, obviously there's a lot of work that goes into the background. There's a bit of an anxiety involved and a bit of tension when it comes to all kind of coming together. But then after you've done it, you always look back on them fondly. You'll say, oh, I'm really glad I did that. Which was the case with the gaming podcast. You put a lot of work into it, and you kind of panic about it a little bit before, but once the green light goes, you start running, you get into the flow, and it's just good fun to do, and obviously good fun to look back on and wonder where the years have gone.
I think the important thing to say here, and I'm going to go to the actor amongst us here, this is completely unscripted, Martin. People don't understand that we just wing it every episode.
Yeah, well, the best drama comes from improvisation, doesn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. But yeah, it's never been scripted. We have a running order, which I'm looking at the minute on the screen, which basically just reminds me of what we should be talking about.
Mm.
Sometimes it gets completely missed and we forget all about it. But I guess at this point, what I have to do is we've been here for 20 years. There's been lots of people on the podcast, and there are a core of people who have been around for a long time. Some of us have taken breaks and then come back, like Neil, disappeared for about 8 or 9 years and came back to the
Couple of years
fold
off.
again. What's that?
Couple of years off.
Yeah, just a couple of years off. And some people have been around for a little while, some people have been around for a number of years and then moved on to other things. So the current panel at the minute is obviously myself and Ed and Ian. Movies-wise, we've got Kaz, who heads up the movies team, and they do the movies podcast. Like I say, they're not finishing or putting their podcast on any kind of break, so they're sticking around. And then in terms of people who've contributed to the podcast, well, obviously we've got Neil here. We also have Stephen Carter, who's not joining us on this podcast, but Steve from Cedia. There's Julian Scott. Martin's here this week. We also got Doug Piper, Mark Costello, Matt. I always get his name wrong. Is it
Eisengruber?
Eisengruber. I always get that, pronounce his name wrong. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just Scottish and the way I pronounce things. And Simon Crust is one of the originals. So Kaz, one of the original people on the podcast. Simon as well. Simon's still around. And then some people have moved on, and some of them very sadly missed on the podcast because they were very, very entertaining to listen to. So I'm thinking about Mark Hodgkinson, Mark Botwright, Steve Withers, Greg Hook, Neil Gardhouse, Sean Marin, Steve May. Steve's still on the circuit. I see Steve on a regular basis. I'll see him tomorrow because I'm heading out to Germany tomorrow for a TV launch. Seth Gecko, Chris McAnini. Chris is on YouTube. He goes under the name Kiltman. You will have seen Chris in a meme that goes around on the internet every now and again saying, here's Mel Gibson with his shopping. And it's actually a photograph of our Chris McAnini walking down the street in his kilt with his shopping bags. And it's really quite entertaining when I see that pop up now and again. I hope you're doing well, Chris, if you're listening. And then John Carlo, Gordon Fraser, David McKenzie. David's done fantastically well for himself. He now runs his own company in the States, doing a lot of encoding work for Hollywood. David was a reviewer with us back in 2009, 2010. And he was also a guest recently on the Movies podcast. It was a Graham Goodburn, Russell Williams. Russell used to do a lot of our speaker reviews and so on. Leon Matthews, Steve Hill, Matt Jarvis, Ben Inger, Seth Grimes, Gordon Balfour, Niall Gill, and James Thomas. And Ed, you made an edit here. Very sad to hear the news.
Yes. He wasn't really a scheduled contributor, but Jim the Cat appeared in a great many of the video podcasts because, broadly speaking, he was drawn to webcams. Quite sadly, Jim is no longer with us. So he had to be put down, unfortunately, on Easter Sunday. So he, at the very least, doesn't have to live in a world where he can't continuously invade my webcam for the podcast. So, yes, he was a fairly regular attendee from the point we switched to video onwards, really. So, fare thee well, Jim. And as I say, if we have to return to this, I'll have to train up the other one to actually want to get involved. So we'll see where we go from there. But yes. He was in quite a few, I think, when it worked out, when you actually look back.
Yep. And I hear that, Ed.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. He was a splendid animal and he had a great life. So that's as much as you can say. And he is, like so many of us, immortalized, like Neil was saying. We are able to look back through the years at the various points, and he's in many of them. So there you go.
Yeah. He's a lovely, friendly chap. Met him. And straight on the lap. Definitely a lap cut.
Oh, yes.
Liked a fuss. Right, so there we go. That's everybody who has contributed to the podcast over the last 20 years, and our thanks to them. It wouldn't be what it was without all those contributions. So thank you very much to everybody that we've just mentioned there. Right, so 20 years. A lot can happen in 20 years. Let's go back and look at some of the tech that we've seen come and go over those years. Some of you might be a little bit surprised at some of the stuff that we're going to talk about here, especially when you look at the dates, because you build up an idea of when you think things actually happened, and then when you actually look at the dates, you think, wow, was it really that long ago? So the first ever OLED TV that I looked at, I didn't review it because I wasn't allowed to review it at the time, and that was Sony's XEL1 from December 2007. I saw it at a trade show. It was a 960 by 540 resolution. It was 11 inches. It cost £1,200. That was the first one. The first mainstream OLED TV was a 55-inch. Now, this took a little while to come to market. I actually went to the launch event.
That's a fabulous understatement.
I went to the launch event a long time before it actually. I think it was 2011 or 2012.
But like this, you can gestate an elephant quicker than LG gestated this television.
Yeah.
So you know.
there was quite a few false beginnings, but yes, it eventually arrived in 2013. Like I say, I did the thing in Monaco. It was F1 testing on that weekend, and it was a big launch party, big launch event, and we went to the practice and all the rest of it, and we were dead excited. And it didn't turn up till 2013, but eventually got there, and it's been around ever since. It's one of the display technologies that we all covet because the dynamic ranges is absolutely amazing from OLED. But you've got to remember that back when that launched, we didn't know about high dynamic range video. HDR wasn't a thing. 4K wasn't a thing back then. We were just getting into Blu-ray in the 2007, 2008. HD was still the prevalent format. Like I say, no HDR. So when OLED was launched, it was the future of TV because it was at the time. It's had to develop quite a bit since then and be able to keep up with all the technological changes. The first 4K TV, anyone want to guess? Well, you all know because you're looking at the running order.
Yeah.
So I can't play that game, unfortunately. That was 2012. LED backlit LCD. 4K, it was the 84LM 9600 from LG, 83 inches, 16 grand.
Well, you reckon one of those is worth now in running condition? 100 quid?
If it's running, maybe. Maybe. Yeah, first 4K TV. The first 4K OLED, again, was LG, the EC9700. And it ties in with the first curved TV. Boy, that didn't last very long, did it?
Well, that was a fascinating example. I think that was one of the first instances of stuff being done because you could, and assuming that the public would somehow love it because you could do it. And the public went, no, it's just wrong. And
it was a technological showcase for OLED because you can bend OLED. That's the
but
big
then
thing.
Samsung went out of their way to prove that you could do it with an LCD too. And they spent all that money to establish that even though you can do it with an LCD, still nobody wants to buy it.
No,
so
nobody wants to buy them. So why would you have a curved TV, Neil, to start with? Other than showing off that LG could...
I've no idea. That was the point you were just making there, Phil.
Yeah. But where curved TVs, where the idea came from, obviously cinema, didn't it? And I used to own a curved projection screen because it made sense. And why did it make sense to have a curved screen of that size?
Well, a curved screen made sense because it was all to do with getting good focus at the edges and stuff like that. And I suppose there is that element. I mean, I'm laughing, but my son has a curved monitor up on his gaming machine in his bedroom. So, you know, it does add that sense of immersion. I think the problem was that, you know, in the era of TVs that we're talking about, you know, 55 inches was like, whoa, proper big telly. But you were sitting, you know, 4 meters away from it in your living room. So it kind of didn't really make sense to immerse yourself deep into the experience. I think that's really what done for it. It was, we all went, "Ooh, curved, clever," and then just couldn't think of a reason for it on a TV, unless you were sitting, like the kids on the games now, like this. Actually, I'm sitting in front of a curved monitor right now. I didn't realize that. So
Oh no, it's one of those things where you get there is that you're absolutely right. In a near field sense, it has carved out a very successful niche for itself. However, we don't sit in our lounges, you know, near field to, as you say, a 55-inch television. It's just its notional benefit was that it was technically possible to do. There wasn't any other benefits to it other than that. But you know, it was a fascinating blind alley. for want of a better
Yeah.
term.
And we've seen rollable OLED. LG did that a couple of years ago. We've seen transparent OLED, which is now a product you can go and buy as well. And that's the beauty of that OLED technology. You can do things like that. And it's not just residential. A lot of it is commercial. I mean, the transparent screens make perfect sense for hotels and other venues and that kind of thing. So it's great to see that technology advancing. One technology we haven't really spoken about. Let's go commercial side. So cinema has changed dramatically. I'm going to come to both Martin and Neil. Martin, just a little bit of your background. So you helped NEC with the DCI compliant projectors back in the day.
Well, the rollout, yes, because there was essentially Barco, Christie, and NEC were the three licensees of the new DCI compliant DMD chips from TI. So yes, we were one of them. Sony had obviously their own SXRD, their LCOS derived tech. So they were doing their own thing, but we were the three sort of, I guess, we formed the bulk of the rollout in the early noughties.
Yeah. And DCI was a big deal, Neil, because we were finally moving away from 35 mil, 65, 70 mil presentations from projectors to digital. And that was a massive jump. And then the DCI side of things was actually pushing that technology on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard if you've never seen it, and it wasn't something that I saw until much later, just how big those reels of film actually were.
Oh, yeah.
And to think of those things moving around the country and every single screening had to have, one of these massive reels of film and transitions over in between and everything, death of the projectionist and all that type of stuff. It really was a fairly skilled job to keep those things going. And people perhaps don't realize, but really it's the move to DCI and digital delivery that enabled the multiplex to make sense. I mean, you just couldn't have a 12 screen with film cameras, with film projectors. Just was impractical to have.
Well, what they did. I mean, they interlocked them. They interlocked them, and it was like an industrial process. The way they used to schedule it across multiple screens.
Yeah, no, a good friend of mine started his career at the same time as I started another career back in the early, it's actually late 90s. And he started working for Warner Village, as they were back then. And many a back shift, I would go in and watch the latest release or whatever. But I had access to have a look at, the projectors and stuff. And it was, like you say, the projectionist would spend probably quite a bit of time running reels, splicing them together. You'd have to splice all the trailers in, you'd have to splice all the adverts in and so on, then wind them onto these, and these were massive wheels holding the films, the big platters, yeah. But then they had a system where the film would run through the projector, down the bottom of the projector, then wrap onto the ceiling, along, and then down and into the second projector, and down and round, and then along and up. So you would have 3 or 4 showings of the same film in different screens. And this one bit of film would run round these 3 or 4. It was fascinating to see. But like you say, moving to digital, see, the thing they couldn't do there was stop screenings that weren't authorized. So, that cinema could run that film through the projector as many times as they liked and show it as many times as they liked and so on. So there was the security side of things, blocking things down. Films had to turn out in the cinema ahead of the release day. So obviously there was the security issues of that film potentially being pirated and so on. And then there was the fact that you had to employ all these projectionists, all these technicians to work in each of these multiplexes up and down the country and across the States and across the world. That's a lot of money you can save if you're able to digitize everything, shove it on a hard drive, have it downloaded to the projector, then locked out. So it only got shown at the times that it's scheduled to be shown. That was the security side, but the actual technology's come on leaps and bounds now in terms of the quality. I don't know the last time you saw a film projected, but the last time I saw a film projected after getting used to digital, it was awful. It was really, really bad. I'm talking about 35 mil. I'm not talking about 70 mil. I've seen a couple of 70 mil presentations and they've been absolutely pristine. But if you see a release print now running through a projector, and you think, we used to put up with that. We used to watch that, the damage to the film, the noise, And you see digital now, and it's the same every time it's shown.
But early generations looked very good, and the first generation of interpositives, looked spectacular. Often the release prints, and we used to get a lot of hand-me-downs from the United States as well because of being an English-speaking territory.
Yeah.
But it could look absolutely magnificent if you were lucky enough to see. But
first run.
But I think what a lot of young people forget today, or don't know today, is that film was a high definition medium.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Back to the 1920s. Yeah. I mean, that's why we use 4, 6, and 8K to scan, this content in, because there is so much detail there. And it's a lost art, and people forget that. Yeah.
I think we have to be really grateful that 65, 70 mil, but absolutely 35 mil is equivalent to around about 4K, 5K. If you're talking about resolution, I mean, it's very, very difficult to pin it down, but it's around about that. We're so fortunate that there's so much actually shot on film that we can now go back and scan, clean it up and scan it properly, and be able to watch, and actually be able to watch it better than it was ever projected or ever seen in the cinema. So the technology is there now.
And film still has a wider color gamut than video.
Yeah.
Although not arguably as good contrast, but
Yep, it wasn't old rubbish, but like I say, once you get used to digital, you go back and watch a release print that's been through the projector 50 times, 60 times.
It's consistency,
yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
the digital,
exactly.
The 100th time's the same as the first time. That's the difference.
Yeah. So it's not just consumer stuff that moved on rapidly in the early noughties, but the professional side as well. So that takes us up to 2012. 2014, we saw our first 4K OLED TV. There was a curved screen, which we've already discussed, and then Dolby Vision. So HDR came around. It confused people then. It's still confusing some people now. The industry's been slow to get behind it. The industry's been slow to understand it. And when I say the industry, I mean like the film industry and color graders and so on. There's been a little bit of pushback, a little bit of resistance in the early days as to why would we use this, until people realize it's just another tool that filmmakers can use to tell their story and tell the story a little bit differently. So Dolby Vision was a big tick in the box. Dolby Atmos obviously came along in 2012, so 2 years before HDR. Again, Atmos was a big jump up on what we'd had previously. I mean, I remember my first home cinema system was Dolby Pro Logic. And then we had Pro Logic 2, and then we had Discrete EX, if I remember right, which split the rear channels. And then we started getting into the digital formats, so Dolby Digital, DTS Digital, and so on. And we've come a long way again in terms of the audio and visual side. And then the first 8K LED TV was 2018. It didn't last long, did it? And there's lots of reasons. We'll get into the reasons of why 8K hasn't really quite worked. But I want to rewind, Ed, back to 2012.
Mm-hmm.
You brought this up. So I'm going to come to you first on this one. 2012 was the death of a format. The format arrived in TVs. And
now, hang on a second. Don't forget, it was 2016 when that article was published, wasn't it?
2016, was it? Was it as long as that? I thought it had a shorter time span than that. But anyway, 2009 was our first commercial TVs.
Yeah.
2010, it really took off. Helped with a cinema release of a film of Blue People, which one of the manufacturers managed to get as an exclusive when the format was released in the home. And they were going on eBay for about 70 quid a disc at the time. And we're talking about 3D. So it hasn't really died, but it has died. It'll come back again. And I saw a demonstration at CES this year of a Samsung gaming monitor where you don't need any glasses. The cameras work out the parallax looking at your eyes, and it's fantastic. But we'll go back to the original this time around, because the original was actually, it's 30-year cycles, isn't it? Martin, you'll be able to correct me on this. It's 30 years 3D. So we had one in, was it early 80s? It was Jaws 3D. Yeah. And then before that, it was Creature from the Black Lagoon. So we're talking.
Well, in the 1950s, Dial M for Murder, all that lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So the 50s, and then Yeah, 80s and then again in the noughties.
But in the end, I think, the audience just didn't really enjoy the act of wearing a pair of glasses.
And I think that's what Ed's going to come on to, yeah.
The biggest issue is all technology must be balanced against the requirements it asks of people who just want to watch Coronation Street. And you can have an 8K HDR image. And if there are people in the room who don't care, it just is an image and it doesn't matter. And this applies just as much to audio as well. If in order for them to not look at a headache-inducing mess, they have to don a pair of glasses for it to work at all, you're on a hiding to nothing. Even before we talk about the limitations of content, we talk about the fact that its actual applications for broadcast TV, I don't think were ever realistically achieved in any meaningful sense of the word. It required a level of commitment from the people involved that the general public is never going to give you. And it's interesting to hear you talk, Phil, about a solution that doesn't involve glasses. If glassless 3D is ever cracked, it'll be fine. It will develop a niche inside of the industry in the same way that other aspects of technology that we've just been talking about have successfully, established a toehold and continue on their way rejoicing. But when you are asking people to sit there with a pair of glasses on, and people myself asking either to fork out for a pair of prescription 3D lenses, which were not cheap, or just wear two pairs of glasses like a complete bell end, it's just not going to fly. And it's one of those things where also, if you then read some of the comments, I mean, this was there's a link that we'll put in an article written by Steve about the death of 3D TV, and it fundamentally unearthed the fact that even amongst the 3D advocates, there were people there was a massive disagreement over what people wanted. Some people wanted massive parallax, so stuff leaping out of the screen at you, like Back to the Future 2, and other people just wanted, a little bit of depth, a little bit of extra cinematography, and they couldn't agree. So when you've got a relatively small fan base, and even that fan base doesn't necessarily know what they want from the technology, the omens were never great.
The thing is, cinema is a social event. You go along with people to watch a movie together. Sitting around the TV with a family, if you've then all got to put these glasses on to watch the TV, and you've got to make sure that the glasses are all synced, because a lot of them were active shutter systems and all that kind of thing, and so on. Once the initial wow factor is done with, people sit down and they don't bother with the glasses anymore, and they don't bother powering the glasses on or charging them up and so on. And even this latest solution that I've seen, which works fantastically well with computer games and so on, I was genuinely blown away when I saw it. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, but this is a solo experience. It's not social. I'm sitting on my own. It's a bit like, Apple Vision and so on. Yeah, great, but it's something you do on your own. It's just there for the one viewer. It's not there for everybody at the same time. And I think that was probably the death nail in the home anyway for 3D, was the fact that there was so much complication surrounding it, and you had the two different approaches to it. And it just got good when they killed it as well, because you had 4K come along, so you had 1080p per eye.
People had worked out how to use it and not do massive parallaxes out of the screens and all of that type of stuff, so your eyes were pointing in two different directions at the same time and all the rest of it.
Yeah. And then, when it comes to the vision side of things as well, we forget that there was a vast amount of people who it never worked for them because of the way that their visual system was, or whether they had an issue with one eye or the other, or so on. And that was a large section of the audience as well, who just couldn't take part in it. So it wasn't as social as just sitting in front of the TV and watching a picture. So I think that's why it died in the home anyway. I mean, it's still commercially available. There are still commercial theaters out there, real 3D.
IMAX 3D of Thunderbolts was sold out completely around me. Yeah. So people still like it.
Yeah, it's still a big thing in theaters, and I think that's where it will remain. Some projectors still do 3D, but I have noticed that there's lots of manufacturers, just from a cost-saving point of view, are now dropping it. So I know that JVC's entry levels, projectors, they no longer have 3D on board, that the higher end ones do. And it'll only be a matter of time before other manufacturers also start removing it from their projectors. But that's been the last kind of stronghold for it in the home, has been on projectors and so on. Anybody out of the panel here today still watching 3D, still have access to 3D?
Am I bollocks? Do you know what? I was tidying up the other day and I found 2 unwrapped, unused pair of active shutter glasses for a Panasonic GT60 Plasma.
Yeah.
That sort of demonstrates my complete and utter lack of commitment to 3D viewing.
I've got a box of active shutter glasses sitting in the cabinet back there in a box somewhere.
Johan Allen at Dolby always used to say 3D keeps coming back like athlete's foot.
Yes. There you go.
I do kind of quite like its potential for gaming still. I still, you see gaming monitors still coming through with a bit of 3D, and I still think there's a bit of merit there. But one of the issues I always had is something that Ed alluded to, is that I always thought one of the strengths of 3D was kind of, the depth of field, the sense of putting you into the film rather than just being like a passive 2D spectator. The curved deep TVs might have helped a little bit. I always thought 3D could help with that, but then all the films that came along just wanted to be like horror films that were just kind of pointing things at the screen like that, and nobody really figured out a good way to implement it. Whereas gaming, I think, might lend itself quite neatly, because as gamers, that kind of depth that can help. If you're playing a racing game, you get a sense of perspective as to where the guys in front of you are. You're playing a shooter, it helps. The audio can tie into it, and maybe that could be a source of respite. A way back for 3D could be gaming, but we'll see.
And I've got to say, that demonstration I had this year, it was a Samsung closed door thing. It's an actual product that will come to market this year or next year. If you're just sitting there playing a game on this monitor, it's a fantastic experience, because it does give you that depth of field, and because it's a game, you can do the gimmicky stuff as well and have the Panel X as strong as you want it and so on. But yeah, that was a technology that has been and gone. So yeah, there's been lots of things that have happened. Netflix streaming. When we first started the podcast, you still got the discs through the post. 2012 January, they started their service, $5.99 a month. Wish it was $5.99 a month now, for their service, and it's come a long way in that period of time, Martin. Back then it was a lot of it was SD, some HD, but now you look at Netflix, the standard now is 4K, Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos, and HDR10.
Yeah, but hang on, before Martin kicks in with all the advantages, back then I used to be able to watch every single episode of the A-Team and every single episode of MacGyver, and I can't bloody do that now, can I? So can we be clear about this? There was a lot of stuff I wanted to watch that I can't watch anymore. And
we'll come on to that, Ed, because the market's changed significantly since back in the day, and I think it's worthy of a discussion. But yeah, go on, Martin.
Well, I was just going to say, I loved Netflix when it came online, because it was kind of the challenger to Blockbuster, the video store in the US. And at that time, it was very movie-centric, and certainly as it had taken over from the disc service. So I had the monthly plan where I had 5 discs in my possession at once, and it felt like you had tremendous control, and you had access to every single DVD and Blu-ray ultimately that had ever been produced. They prided themselves on having every catalog title. And then Netflix became essentially, like I said, a movie platform, and I loved it when it was in that state. I didn't like it so much when they went off and started producing their own content, but I guess it was to be a natural evolution. But I liked it in its movie form, and like I said, the challenger to Blockbuster.
As an actor, though, Martin, did it not open up more doors, or potentially open up more doors, when Netflix and companies like that then start financing their own films and making their own things?
Yeah, yes, it does. And wherever there's an outlet for more broadcasting, but you only have a certain set of eyes as well. So the reality is that the baton just gets passed around, and some platforms become more popular, others don't. But it doesn't necessarily mean there is more room for actors, because people have only got a number of watch hours per day.
So those were the big things that have happened. So how did we cover them in the podcast? And like I say, Andy's put together a fantastic document, which you'll be able to find in the podcast forum. So let's just quickly go through some of the highlights on the podcast. And now I'm going to come to the guys for their memories and some of the big significant things that have happened in the last 20 years for them in this hobby, and for some of our panel, their profession as well. So our first look at the Nintendo Wii was 2006. Ian.
Yeah, I've got to point out I was working on an Xbox magazine at the time, so my allegiance was in completely the wrong place. So I maybe didn't give it the attention it deserved. But I would point out that you mentioned like the Lover's Guide 3D thing earlier. I mean, the name didn't lend itself particularly well to the Western audience. So we're obviously making plenty of jokes at this expense, especially the fact that the logo with the W and the little, the lowercase i's looked like something you'd see on the sign of a gentleman's toilet. So there was, again, lots of puns. And the first game that came out, or the big game that came out, was called Wii Sports, which really didn't do it too many favors. But yeah, I mean, I do remember, like, because it was obviously a big time for gaming in general, because the Xbox 360 had just come out, the PS3 was just around the corner as well. But yeah, the Wii just, it did things differently and made a niche for itself. It made fun gaming more acceptable, because gaming was starting to take itself quite seriously. The Nintendo Wii came along and it was just great fun. No one cared. Old ladies could play it with young kids, and it was just brilliant fun.
Took gaming back to its roots, really. If you think about, the Wii in comparison to something like an Atari back in the day, where you had the paddle controller and it made it fun. The games weren't spectacular cinematic pieces of work. They were fun, interesting.
Yeah, the graphics were terrible, but no one cared, because you could just swing your arms back. Motion control, that everyone thought was going to be a big thing, was kind of, it was cool. It was fun to use. And then Sony Microsoft came along, tried to make it serious, and no one cared. So yeah, the Wii was kind of very much left on its own to do its thing, and smash it out of the park.
One of the last big format wars that we saw in this industry was HD DVD versus Blu-ray. It was the first time I went to CES. This battle was ongoing at the time. It made for fascinating coverage, fascinating. It's just to see how things played off. And it was one of those things that there's been many rumors since, but it was all in Warner Brothers' hands when we come down to the end of the day, because they were agnostic. They were releasing on both formats. It was a big gamble. Blu-ray was a huge gamble for Sony. They had to win. It was as simple as that. They had to win, one way or another. And it actually came down to the first CES I was at. The deal was made the night before the press conference, where Warner said, okay, we're going Blu-ray. And at that point, I went to that press conference, Toshiba press conference, and I still remember that poor lady getting up on stage and just having to say, well, that's it, it's over. It's the strangest, one of the big first press conferences I've ever been to, and one of the strangest. I've never seen anything like it since, but yeah, it was fascinating to see. It was fascinating that took place as we were starting as an editorial here. We were all enthusiasts, and we were all, really interested to see which way it was going to fall. I bet wrong. I thought HD DVD at the time it was technically better.
So was Betamax, and this is
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, and again, it had to work for Sony. There's lots of suggestions out there that if they hadn't won that, then we might not have had Sony as we know it.
Well, and that there were lots of sweeteners to the studios to make sure it worked as well.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the nice things about HD DVD, it was stamped on the same pressing machines as DVD. So there was a kind of economy of scale there. The encodes were generally of better quality, and I had VC1, that confirmed by Joe Kane. And I wondered why the transfers always look slightly better on HD DVD than Blu-ray, and that was precisely why that was. Plus, the players were really nice, and plus there was more scope for animating the menus and making the menus for each disc much more creative.
Yeah. No, it was, and I thought there was the one that was. It had a good bit of momentum. It came out first as well, so they managed to beat Blu-ray out the door and so on. But yeah, it was just a fascinating thing, and that was the first big story that I really worked on and was able to follow from beginning to end and so on. So for me, that's a big part of my AV life was that. And of course, that was 2007, 2008. So we covered all that in the podcast. And like I say, Andy's put together this fantastic document. You can jump straight into those podcasts. If you want to time travel, go back and find out all about these things. Now, I did hint at the first OLED TV. The first one that I ever got my hands on in my own home to test was from LG, and it was a massive 15-inch OLED TV at the time. It was the EL9500, and I was blown away. It was the first time I was able to spend a lot of time just looking and playing around with it and testing it out and so on. And of course, like we've said, it's gone on to be the technology that still needs to be beaten. I mean, mini LED TVs, RGB micro LED TVs, and all. These are the things that might come along at some point and replace it. But for now, OLED still remains one of the big things. The Gadget Show Live 2012. Oh, I remember that. I remember the sore feet. So for those of you who weren't around at the time, that was the first big show, I think, that certainly we did as AVForums. We had our own stand. The late Alan Roser put together our demo for us with Sim2 projectors and big audio system and so on, and that was a fantastic thing to do. And that's when these shows were big. I mean, it's starting to come back now, Neil, in terms of trade shows and so on. It did die off, obviously, with COVID and so on getting in the way, but the trade show, it started to come back, started to be a bit more relevant again.
Well, it's difficult. We have a massive trade show called ISE, and that thing is so absolutely gigantic. It's almost unbelievable how big ISE is now. And then you have obviously like IFA and stuff like that. And I don't know if its importance ever really.
ISE's masterstroke was moving from Amsterdam, where it was either bloody cold or raining, and moving it to Spain, where it's generally doing neither of those things.
I'll go back to Amsterdam tomorrow. I'll go back.
Well, I don't know. It does seem to have picked up in size since it got sunnier. I'm not saying just correlation equals causation, but
just a pain in the backside getting there. Much less UK guys going as well these days, unfortunately. But I think that one of the things is what's the future, not so much for the trade show, but for like the enthusiast show. I think hi-fi shows have proven that there's still a huge appetite for people to see stuff like this. And that's something that I personally would love to see, some way for enthusiasts in our market. We've seen it in the US, and the guys in Germany, they're very good at it. There has to be a way for us to somehow make that possible in the UK as well, to let people see some of these technologies that we get to talk about and play with, and people think are crazy and write insulting things on forums about, instead of getting to experience them for themselves. So
so that's that is the thing. I mean, the Gadget Show, I don't know if the Gadget Show still exists in its current form, if it's anything like it was back in 2012. I mean, there's the image there if you're watching on the video, 3D home cinema. That was 2012 we did that, so we only had a year till that technology died out. So there you go. But yeah, that was a fantastic thing. Also 2012 we launched our Picture Perfect campaign. It's still relevant, it's still on the website. Nothing's actually changed in terms of the advice, even though we're living in an HDR world and all the rest. The advice is exactly the same as it was back in 2012. It does need a little bit of an update, and that's something that we're going to do while the podcast takes a break. That is one of the projects. We're going to revisit that and just update a little bit here and there. And mainly that's just terminology and naming of things has changed slightly from back when that was launched. So I don't think any TVs have THX mode on them anymore, and I don't think the ISF mode is big a thing. It's now filmmaker and so on. So there's just some of the terminology needs to be changed. Some of the videos are a little bit updated and so on. But a lot of the advice we gave back then in terms of just putting the TV in the correct mode and making sure it's set up for the environment that you're using it's totally relevant, even in HDR. So yeah, go follow Picture Perfect. Like I say, that's one of the projects we're going to be working on this summer, is updating that. Smart TV is a gimmick. We covered that in 2013. Smart TV has turned into a bit of an animal now. bit of a money-making machine, maybe for the wrong reasons. It's all about selling advertising now. It's all about collating personal details. You can't sign in to a TV. When you start a new TV up, and I do this on a weekly basis because I have new TVs coming in every week, you have to go through the same rigmarole every time. You have to put all your personal details in there. You have to sign up for a Samsung account or an LG account or a Panasonic account or a Google TV. Or it's turned into a bit of an animal now. Back then, it was all about streaming services and just being a little bit smarter with the TVs. Nowadays, yeah, the experience is great. You've got AI also starting to creep in now, so you can ask your TV to do things and it will do them, and the interactions there. But I think the big concern for everybody, I don't know how it is in the professional side, Neil, but I think the big concern for a lot of people is personal details being shared and advertising by the back door.
Well, not just personal details being shared, but there's actually a lot of security threats around that. I mean, we've all seen Marks and Spencer's, who's been in the news whilst we've been recording this, and other supermarkets. And a lot of these TVs, people don't realize, but they're basically Android computers now. A lot of the stuff that they're running on, and they do have vulnerabilities that people can access. And it's not something that I ever took that seriously when I was a bit younger, but I've been in luxury homes and seen people in literally sweeping them for bugs and finding bugs in people's houses and stuff like that. So, the idea of a sort of invasive virus or whatever you want to call it, and an agent getting installed on a TV to capture people's details, it doesn't seem so far-fetched to me anymore. And actually, that is a selling point in a lot of, we always used to have commercial displays, guys, and all that type of stuff. That is something in a lot of commercial displays now, is that they are certified, maybe not smart, but certified secure, as opposed to the smart thing. So I really think that is something that people get more and more aware of. And I don't know about the rest of you, but it's almost the tediousness of it, isn't it? You just know that you're just getting harvested these days when you're doing those types of things. And who knows, maybe one of these days we'll be able to get away from it, but I guess it's worth a lot of money to the companies.
It is, and it's one of the big things that is being discussed in the industry at the minute. Martin, if you bought a £4,000 TV and from the minute you switched that TV on, it was serving you adverts, would that annoy you?
Yeah, it would. I get very frustrated with advertising and having to be forced to pay if I don't want advertising as well. As you know, it's rife on YouTube now, and YouTube started as a very democratic platform where people shared their content for free to be watched for free as well, and it's become everything that's not that. So all the goodwill from a lot of this stuff has now disappeared.
Yeah, and Ed, fast is a thing now. So, free to air, but served with advertising. Lots of these manufacturers now starting their own channels, so LG channels, Samsung channels, all that kind of thing.
I just ignore most of it. I mean, it must be said, these, when Netflix started, it was an opportunity for a quite surprising amount of content, especially content that wasn't doing anything else, to be collated in one place. Netflix monetized the unmonetizable, because individually to studios it was worth bugger all. And it was, collated in one place. And people went, do you know what? I'll pay £6 a month for that. And in 15 years, it's been turned out to the point where all of a sudden it is now once again fragmented to all hell. And there will be a point in the next 3 to 4 years where some sort of ironically, Sky is closer to this than anyone else at the moment, where actually it's all, it hauls in, and you can actually start getting it all in one place in a sort of more organized and collated way. After a point where some of these services are presumably, I don't know quite how profitable they are, and whereas Apple and Amazon can go, well, do you know what, we'll swallow these costs if we need to, although Amazon obviously make you pay not to have adverts as it is. There'll be a point where it'll sort of, I imagine, then just start to go full circle, and we'll be back with the sort of cable provider sort of ideal of them hauling in all of these channels to which you pay a subscription, one subscription for, to have access to all of them. Because as it stands at the moment, I mean, I've never had a Paramount subscription. I've never had, there's another one I've never handed over any money for. And I just can't, and I've let Disney go, and I have to say Netflix is on the bubble. I simply can't be asked to drain off normally best part of £100 a month if you start looking at most of these things. And I just know I can't be having with that. And they aren't getting my custom. And if they want to seek my custom, they're gonna have to look at getting this stuff back into something approaching an orderly single subscription model. It was a good thing while it lasted, and now it's been well and truly broken.
Yeah.
Well,
I've got
just to pick up one other thing as well there. Sorry, Phil, just to jump in. The other thing with all of the streaming services and all that type of stuff is all of the content is delivered to you by algorithm. So I don't know about you guys, but I find now if I watch something, I'm almost thinking, how is this going to mess up the recommendations that dictate everything that's going to get recommended to me? It's not like you ever stumble across a new show or anything like that. It's like, oh, you watched this, so here is one exactly the same as the one you just watched type thing. I think that's a big challenge as well.
Oh, we had the grandkids staying with us for a week over Easter. I went into my Netflix the other day, and I'm being recommendations of Peppa Pig and all this.
I mean, mate, you should get in on that, because some of the episodes are absolutely
I actually prefer
brilliant.
Bluey. I think Bluey's a bit more...
Bluey's brilliant, and Ben and Holly's Little Kingdom is actually a bit of a gem. I can still quite happily watch an episode of that, even though my son is far outside its target audience.
But like Neil says, it doesn't mess up the algorithm when it comes to recommendations and you may like and all the rest of it. My problem with all this at the minute is if you are spending £4,000 on a TV, you've paid the premium for that TV. How dare the manufacturer then sell that screen space to the highest bidder to then flood my screen with adverts? That's just not on. I do not agree with that at all. If it's a service where you know there's advertising attached to it, then fair enough. You go in with your eyes open. But if you're going in and buying a TV and then they're taking over a third, in LG's case, of your smart TV screen with advertising, you can switch it off, but it's so buried in the menus that the vast majority of people are not going to go in and switch it off and so on. I don't agree with that at all. I think that's not the way to do it. Ed, you said as well that many services out there. I actually cancelled Sky a number of years ago because I think my subscription had gone up to about 100 and something pounds, £110. I counted it up the other day in terms of how to what I was subscribing to in terms of music and TV, 130 quid. Yeah.
It's interesting actually that Sky, since they changed to those streaming only, there's little hang on a second, sorry, I think I've had someone at the door, but
so while Ed goes to answer you see, these things never happened on the recorded ones because we could always edit them out and so on. But anyway, while Ed does,
I was going to say the little Sky Stream boxes, which are all around the house, and I have to say that I am actually a user of the Sky Stream. And it's just what Ed said. Everything is kind of collated on a menu. And it's interesting to me listening to you guys because I never use the smart TV screen. But the first thing we ever do is press the Sky source button to get rid of all the mess on the TV.
No, I've got Sky Stream in the living room. It's the one that everybody in the household knows how to use, and it's easy to switch on. And
ironically, that was someone trying to sell me Virgin. So,
Yeah, it's not just your mobile phone that listens in on you now. It's the guys walking down the street, I'm going to sell him Virgin. He's talking about Sky. But yeah, Sky Stream, the only thing is the technical limitations, obviously, of the Sky system. It doesn't match frame rate and that kind of thing, which doesn't really help in a 50 hertz country. But I think Apple do that far better with their TV box. But yeah, like you say, Neil, it's nice and easy. They act as Wi-Fi boosters as well, so you get the benefits of that as well, and so on. So yeah, there's good technology out there. Right, so moving on from smart TV, we've already declared 3D was dead as well. Panasonic dropped plasma in 2013. We got into the OLED age. Then 2014, interesting, I was there at the time, Ed, big surprise because Technics disappeared. The reason Technics disappeared was they went chasing and the quality just got worse and worse and worse.
It
Prices
wasn't
came down,
great.
and they decided to kill the brand off. The brand came back in 2014 as a high-end brand. We all kind of wished them well at the time and didn't think it was really going to work. You're releasing a turntable that other people had kind of jumped on the bandwagon and copied the
Don't
design and all
forget,
the rest of it.
actually, when they relaunched the Technics brand, there wasn't a turntable. The original stuff was entirely
speakers,
digital
yeah.
and so on and so forth. And it was like, are you doing a turntable? Oh, no, we're not sure about that. It was one of those things where it must be said, they, in terms of relaunches, they did do it right. They went top down. The engineering was clearly there. But yes, it was an interesting test because, you know, I remember you and I discussed it. We were genuinely felt that they'd done enough damage to the brand with the last 2 generations of product that, we didn't know if it could make stage a successful comeback. And it's done pretty well for itself. And I think it's helped that they didn't. I mean, obviously the turntables are retro in themselves, but the engineering in them is bang up to date. And actually the amplifiers and some of the other stuff they've done has been very, very sophisticated. They haven't pulled the punches in terms of what they've been doing, and it's carved out a reasonably successful niche for itself.
Yeah. No, they've gone away from the box shifting and cutting prices and all the rest of it, and actually gone for a higher end ticket price and using good quality components and so on. And I've been really impressed with how they've moved that on, because I didn't think they were going to last. But now we're at 2014. So the rest of the stuff here, I'm just going to pick out the ones that really stand out. The list will, like I say, be in the article at the top of the podcast forum. Go and have a look at that if you're interested in really deep diving. I guess the last one that kind of got the cat amongst the pigeons was Samsung with QD OLED. For years and years and years, it was QLED. LED, LCD TV, OLED was rubbish. It couldn't match LCD, and then all of a sudden they had to basically come out with OLED TV, and a massive U-turn. But they actually came to market with a really, really good product in QD OLED. We're now on to 4th generation. It's doing really, really well. So that's a great technology. Just to wrap up on the 20 years of that. Right, so let's cut to our memories. Last 20 years, the big products for us, the big things that have moved the market on for us, things that have maybe shaped our careers, technologies that have come and gone or whatever. I'm going to go to Martin first. Martin, last 20 years, where were you there? Where are you now? And what shaped it?
Well, actually, the biggest transition that made any kind of impact on me was actually going back to the early 90s, which is beyond 20 years ago, but that was a transition from 2-channel stereo to Dolby Pro Logic as it was then. So yeah, that's going back a long way, but I think getting a projector in my home cinema, a high definition projector, was an incredible experience. Yeah. And showing that to people, because people had no idea. They only had experience of what a business projector looked like.
Or in the pub. That's the only place you got to see them.
Or a pub telly, and they were blown away generally. Yeah. So yeah, those were big impactful points for me, I guess.
Yeah. I think, I'm going to talk for Ed here, but I think for the rest of us, maybe the whole Pro Logic thing, hooking your Nikon stereo VCR up to a hi-fi and then going into Pro Logic. And I think we all kind of started at the same place. We all started out as enthusiasts and got to that point. I guess with the last 20 years, and I'll come in at this point with what I think. I've made a career out of it. I know Neil's going to say the same thing. It's been such things have moved on so quickly. And based on how where we are now to where we were 20 years ago is unrecognizable. It was starting to change when I started working with AVForums. TV was just starting to change. You had plasma, LCD, and that kind of thing, and we've gone on from there onto great things. Home cinema was much more popular in terms of much more popular in terms of the whole market out there. People wanted to have a taste of that at home, and it's been interesting to see how that's come and gone and then come back again, and how things have developed with soundbars and so on. But for me, it's really how we've moved on in the last 20 years. If you'd said to me when we were starting out on this podcast and so on, what I'd have at home in terms of technology, what I'd have in my pocket in terms of technology, that's the biggest game changer from where we were 20 years ago to where we are now. What you have in your pocket, your iPad, your computing power, everything else on top of the technology, and then the fact that we can watch better than cinema quality pictures and audio at home, and then where that's gone from there in terms of multi-room immersive audio, all that kind of thing. It's just getting bigger and bigger and better and better. And as a reviewer, it's getting more and more difficult. I don't know about Ed in terms of the hi-fi side of things, but definitely in terms of display reviewing and so on, things are so good now. It's where do you go with this stuff? How does it get better and so on? And yeah, it's fantastic where we are now to where we were 20 years ago. Ian, what about you from a gaming perspective?
From the gaming, I mean, ironically, almost you probably got to go back to 2006 to really, which was, I mean, I mentioned earlier, it was around the time that the Xbox 360 came out, the PS3 came out, the Nintendo Wii came out, and to hear you guys talk about the TVs and how that's kind of been evolving every year, it makes me kind of envious, because I think 20 years ago, the transitions, the generational leaps in gaming were huge, from where they were. And I think it's kind of been a bit diminishing returns since then. I think like the step up to the PS4, the Xbox Ones was good, but not as big. And then more recently, the PS5 and the new Xbox. It's more incremental. It's not quite as big leaps. So I think if you're looking for the game changes, you do have to go back sort of 20 years back to those consoles that were delivering multiplayer, sort of 16 players, which, it's nothing these days. But back then it was a big deal, open worlds, the freedom to explore, to go out and do things in gaming, things you hadn't done before. Whereas now you're seeing things and it's just, the graphics are a little bit better. We've got ray tracing, we've got these other little neat things. You can do these smart little things, but there's not quite the game changer. So in terms of what made the biggest difference and helped give me a career, at least in gaming, for a good few years, was probably those few generational shifts from the original Xbox, from the PS2 to the PS3, and so on and so forth. So those were happy times indeed, and hoping that in 2 to 3 years' time we'll see equally similar seismic jumps for the next generation of gaming. Yeah,
and of course, gaming's benefited again from HDR as well. So that's now part of the and cinematic games and so on, in the way that the gaming PCs come back. That surprised me, Ian, just how big that industry is and how
it's always been there, but it seems to kind of it sort of fluctuates in terms of sort of pricing and accessibility, and also I think when you see things, because when the consoles first came along, and even like again going back 20 years, they were like the cool hip thing. Everybody needed to have the new console, so you had to go out and spend £400-500. Now, like I say, it's not such a big deal to have the new console. So maybe you could put that £400-500 for a starter PC. And I think that there's a bit more flexibility as well. I think the shift around away from, well, not necessarily away from, but the indie scenes come back in gaming. And I think that kind of, a lot of that ties into PC in terms of being more accessible for people to make games for it and to sell games on it. And it does make PCs a bit more accessible. And, that will come and go. There'll be a time when sort of, for various reasons, the price of the PC components will skyrocket again, and people will be like, "Oh no, I'll settle for the PS7 or whatever we're up to at the time." So I think those kind of things will come and go over the years, but it does make me kind of a little bit envious, but still kind of wishful that I never really got into the whole PC scenario, because I really do like the idea of taking something from scratch and upgrading it and building it over the years, but at the same time, I'm not envious of the expense that could come with it, and feeling the need. Let's just write a new graphics card. Am I going to want to spend another £1,000 upgrading my PC? Maybe, but at least with the consoles, I bought this. It's going to at least be relevant for sort of 5 to 7 years. I'm okay for a little bit at least.
Yeah, right. Neil.
Yes.
The last 20 years. How are you going to sum it up in a few minutes?
It all seems very quick, I've got to be honest with you. I think that for me, it's been very interesting to see how we've moved through technology, but not really brought new technology. Everything's an evolution, isn't it? So for me, one of my highlights is when we had our first immersive system installed, with all of the audio and 13 whole channels, and it was just crazy when we did that. But really, was it miles better? We've had this discussion not that long ago. Was it miles better than a really good 5.1? More. And I think that that goes for a lot of the things that we're involved with these days. And I guess that that is perhaps reflected sometimes in the forum discussions. 20 years ago, we were having big transitions from film to digital and CRT to digital projectors and, all this type of stuff. And I don't know, people coming in who are probably not in their 40s yet, nothing really changed tech-wise, if you think about that. The turntable came back. That's probably the biggest one for the young kids. And I'm always looking out, and I hope that that there are new technologies that can come out that can move the experience on, in the way that we got to enjoy when we were getting into this whole business. It's not been bad though. It's still making cool things for people to watch telly on. It's not the worst job in the world, is it?
No, absolutely. I think we're really, really, really lucky in this industry. We get to play with toys all day long and pass judgment, or in Neil's case, design really, really interesting living spaces and so on. Or Ian playing on his latest simulator, whatever you're simulating this week.
I'm still power washing, man. That never
You're still
goes
power
away.
washing, okay.
Oh, yeah.
So let's wrap up on hi-fi, because it's the oldest of the industries. It hasn't gone anywhere. And in fact, Ed, I think it's probably the strongest it's been in a long time.
Yeah, I have there's a different arc for mine.
Yeah.
Essentially, there were existential questions over whether affordable 2-channel had any future at all in 2006. Affordable multi-channel was doing so many things and doing it so well and achieving market penetration that was such that actually developing specific 2-channel stuff just didn't seem like much of a sensible undertaking. They've applied to 2-channel and multi-channel in the same time, but 2-channel has consistently got the better end of the deal in terms of how things have worked. So it's gone from being something which was niche and getting more niche to something where, we're actually starting to see 2-channel products take on the roles of affordable multi-channel products with a view to supplanting them. So HDMI ARC, room optimization, all sorts of things like that. Borrowed, stolen. Your mileage may vary from multi-channel. And I'm more positive now in 2025 doing podcast 768 than I was when I started doing podcasts sometime in 2012, I think. I don't know how much longer that can continue for. We'll see. You don't know what the future holds, but my arc of product, in some ways, you guys are talking about how things have stagnated a bit and so on and so forth. Hi-Fi's sort of been stagnating for the last 40 years in an absolute technical sense, what it does, but the nature of how it's been doing it, I'm much more positive about it. So I'm in a good place.
Excellent. Just to help everybody out, Ed's album playlist and vinyl of the podcast years. Let's do that as an article, because
Yeah.
I think that's the way to do it, Ed. So look out for that on AVForums. Ed will give us an article of his albums, his playlists, and his vinyl recommendations over the last 20 years. Go search that out. So we just need to do the competitions and supporters. So Ian, we prepped you at the beginning. On you go.
Yeah, I'll keep it fairly quick, but as always, there's some great competitions up on the AVForums website. I've got a big hardware competition on the go at the moment, which is to win a single Tuscany executive heat and massage home theatre chair in midnight black. That's worth around £1,249. It sounds ridiculously comfortable. I won't go into the full description because it feels like it might just kind of send me to sleep in kind of some kind of luxurious slumber. But that's up on the site now, as always. Along with a wealth of DVD and Blu-ray competitions, there's always a bunch of those on order, which will fill a shelf in no time. All those competitions are available to patrons and AVF members to enter. Quick reminder, those competitions are open to all eligible AVF Forum members who are 18 years old and over and are residents of the UK. All you got to do is head over to avforums.com/competitions to get your name in the hat to win a whole bunch of stuff, including a very, very comfortable chair.
Okay, and previous winners, patrons, etc.
Previous winners. If you like the sound of the single Tuscany chair, you can contact Long John Silver to find out what he finds or how he's getting on with his single chair Tuscany Ultimate XL in Onyx, which is worth £2,100 that he was the lucky winner of. So yeah, maybe you can compare the two. I've also got some new patrons, courtesy of Pete Tucker and Geiger167. So welcome to both of those. And also thank you to those who have bought us a coffee, which is the Someone, which is the anonymous contributor, along with Repo Man 666. So thank you very much for those for buying us a coffee.
Yep, thank you very much for all of your support. Thank you very much for all your support over the last 20 years. The podcast's not going anywhere. We're just taking a long break. We'll be back at some point in the future. But hopefully our look back at the last 20 years has been enjoyable for you. So my thanks to Ed, Neil, Martin and Ian. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
And of course, our next episode will be at some point in the future. But of course, don't forget, the Movies Podcast isn't going anywhere. The guys will be here every month with a Movies Podcast. And look out for other bits and pieces that the guys are going to do in terms of physical media, 4K discs and that kind of thing. We've got lots of things coming up there. We're not going anywhere either. We're still on the forums. So if you want to get in touch with us, you can get in touch with us through the usual channels on the forums, at us on any of the threads you want us to dip into. Or you can also follow us on social media. So we're on X, Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube, and of course on the forums themselves. It's been fun the last 20 years. We've thoroughly enjoyed it. Hopefully we'll be back soon with more for you on the podcast. But like I say, go subscribe to the YouTube channel. Lots of videos coming up, lots of reviews, how-tos, tutorials, and so on. Me and Ed have been discussing some more hi-fi videos, so that's all coming, as well as the TV reviews and so on. We'll be visiting Neil soon and find out a lot about what Neil's been up to, especially with this space behind me. It's nearly done. We're going to do all the coverage of the build and so on for that as well. So yeah, thank you very much for watching and listening. I'm Phil Hinton, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.